My name is Chhinzer. I'll do a quick canvas of the room and get a better perspective of really what you have planned for yourself in the next 5 to 10 years. And if there's anything among myself or my partners that we can give you some insight or some inside wisdom that can help get you to where you want to get to, by all means, we'll be more than happy to provide it to you wholeheartedly. We won't hold too much back. We'll tell you what it is. So just by a raise of hands, how many of you here have policing down the road for you? Oh, perfect. And those who don't have it, what are your options, or what are you looking to do?
Parole.
Parole. Anybody else? So you got parole, police officers. What about law? Yes? Immigration. And what else? So parole, immigration, police officers. Undecided. How many people are undecided? How many people trying to find somebody rich and lock them down? All right. Listen, it's all good. And then for those of you that are undecided, what are you thinking? Like, what do you really think will be the next couple steps for you? Don't know? Tough? A lot of different options? Sorry. Yes?
Well, I'm going to do a second bachelor's degree in psychology, and then I'm going to do my master's in psychology, and then maybe a doctorate.
So then school for the next 40 years for you, that's the plan, right? Yeah. And then at the end of all that, when you get all that, then what? No idea. Get a job. All those amazing letters and then get a job, right? That's kind of how it goes. So I think ultimately what you guys are studying, you're in the same space that we're all going to get into, regardless of what you think your profession is going to be, whether it's going to be a police officer, probation, parole, or immigration, or be a PhD. It doesn't really matter. I think we're all in the same space of the same thing being, we want to do two things. We want to make an impact on the world, and we want to help people. Safe to say? Yeah, I agree. That's pretty much the basis of, I think, anybody that wants to do anything is they want to, at least healthy people, I'll say, because not everybody has a luxury of being in a healthy environment, but for those of us in a healthy environment, being you here in school, believe it or not, you have it a lot better than a lot of people that we deal with on a regular basis. You kind of already have a platform, you kind of already have a vision ahead of you. Now it's getting to that vision. And in that, I'll kind of just share to how I got to where I got to, and then I'll open up to my partners if they want to share, and then hopefully you get some insights in there. So for myself, I was born in Toronto, but raised in Brampton. All right, and when I was raised in Brampton, I was the youngest of 4 kids. My parents immigrated to this country from India. They didn't speak a lick English for the most part, but they learned it when they were here. Their education was not honored here or valued in the same respect that it was back home. My mom had a very good education. My dad did not. My dad came from military. He dropped out of high school in grade 10, lied about his age, joined the military, fought in a couple wars in India and Pakistan. And then my mom came from like a really rich family. Her dad was a doctor and she was a teacher. And back then when they got married, they were very rare because love marriages traditionally in India do not exist, especially at the time. Now it's changed, but back then they were love marriage, right? So they fell in love like a movie, like a nice Bollywood movie. They immigrated over to Canada. They had to leave everybody behind because just like an Indian movie, her parents did not approve of my dad, all right? And they gave her this ultimatum, and my dad had no family, all right? He has no family. His dad died when he was young. He again lied, ran away from home. They fell in love, and then they came to Canada. So when they came to Canada, they came with their 2 best friends, all right? Like 2 couples, all best friends. So for me growing up, they were my family. They were my aunt and uncle. And when we got here, growing up, we were consistently reminded that my parents didn't go through everything that they went through for us to be screw-ups. There's not an option for you, right? When I graduated, or I won't even say graduated, but I distinctly remember every time I'd get in trouble, my dad would say 2 things, right? And he meant it. He'd say, look, if I ever get a phone call from your teacher or you come on no handcuffs, you're leaving here in an ambulance. And he meant it, right? He used to beat us up all the time. But that was like old school mentality. So got this upbringing, right? Everything bad that happened, my parents would always say, look, we're doing this all for you. All the racism they went through at the time, all the other garbage that was flat out in your face. And when I talk about racism, I think it's important to talk about only in this respect. The way it is today is not how it was, all right? And not how it was. Back then, even for me growing up, and I'm sure people have their own thing, it was just in your face, right? Like it was right in your face. People didn't know what I was, and to this day, they still don't know what my background is unless I tell them. So I've gotten called everything. I've been called, you name it, I got it, all right? But at the time when it happened, it was in your face. It wasn't as crippling as it might be today. It just kind of happened. It sucked, but you just laughed it off, and you're like, this guy's an idiot. This guy's a complete idiot. You just kind of knew where it was. Now it's very subtle, right? It's really subtle. You don't really know. I actually almost preferred it the other way because you just knew where everybody was at. Here, it's kind of just hidden. So we had all that growing up, and for us, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate, I can only speak from this respect because I don't know what the other side is, but I could tell you for most people with immigrant parents to this country, it was like when I graduated high school, it wasn't like a big deal, right? I graduated high school as valedictorian and class president, and it didn't mean anything. I still remember at the end of it, I do my speech, and my family showed up, and at the end of the valedictorian speech and graduation in high school, and I was on different sports teams. And I was like captain of like 2 of them, so I'd like done really well in high school because I was terrified not to do well. All right, and when I did well, I remember at the end of it, I give my speech and we're going home, and I asked my dad, and I'm like, Dad, can I go out to eat with my friends? And he goes, for what? I'm like, I graduated. I was president of valedictorian. He's like, this is high school. You're supposed to graduate. And I went home and I had to break break tile for like the week. All right, because we had to redo our floor in our house, and back then you couldn't afford to have somebody come in, so we had to do all the manual labor. So I did that. I went to university, and this is where things started to get a little twisted for me. So I went to university for what almost 90% of cops go to university for, kinesiology and health science. So I went for the meathead stuff because that is where I lived. That was my home. I was always into sports and all that stuff. And I got there, and within 2 years, I'm like, this is not for me. Like, I was not drawn to it at all. There was no part of it, with the exception of like being in shape, that I really cared about. And I flunked out. So I flunked out of university. I pretty much got punted out of York University. And when I got punted out, from the age of 15, I always had 2 or 3 jobs at one time. Because again, growing up in the environment I grew up in, if I was not working and I was not in school, I was wasting time. Right? That was my dad. Like, if I had a day off, and I'd worked some horrible jobs, if I had a day off, my dad was like, what are you doing here? You know, my dad's mentality was very much work hard, not work smart. So if I could do overtime, you better do overtime. If you're not working on this day, you better pick up a second job. So I just adopted that mentality. As I went through university, got flunked out, came back, I was always hustling, doing a whole bunch of different jobs. And I'd done some really interesting ones. One of the best ones I had, I'll say best and worst, was I was a doorman at pretty much every nightclub in Toronto from like 19 to 24, right, up until me getting hired by the Toronto Police Service. But I couldn't show that on paper. Right, because it's not like when you're a doorman at these clubs, like they got you on a payroll and there's benefits and you're paying EI, you just get cash and you leave. So I had to have day jobs during the day to show that, hey, I'm like a reliable person. All that stuff happens, and from 19 to 24, I'd applied to policing 5 times and I got rejected 5 times. All right, 3 times by one police service. I went through the whole process, and by the end of it, my parents went bankrupt when I was in grade 3, so we were bouncing around for 7 years. All the friends that I had made came from low-income areas, right? And they were all broken family guys. And my family was very much together, but it was not a healthy environment. And when you go around, you make all these friends. I made all these friends that were bad influences. Well, the guys I was with were the guys who were getting caught, and I could not break that association. All right, they could not see past that. So eventually, I decided, you know what, I'm going to try one last time, and I tried with Toronto. That was the first time I tried with Toronto. And the difference I found in Toronto versus all the other police services that I applied to was every other police service that I applied to was looking for a reason not to hire me. Toronto was looking for a reason to hire me. And crazy enough, there's all these like small stories in there. I'll tell you how crazy it got. And this is the importance of not being a jerk and not being in your life, which ultimately, I mean, if you've been, it might be a little too late for you. You can always fix it, but you can't go back. But I'll tell you, there's this girl, and her name is, and I grew up with her. And for me, even though I moved a lot, my parents did one good thing. And the good thing that they did is they kept me in the same feeder school system. So all the people I graduated high school with, I'd known since kindergarten. So I'd known everybody, right? And you know, from kindergarten all the way up, when you get to know everybody, you don't look at them as like skaters or jocks or goth, or you don't look at them like that. You just know each other from when you're kindergarten. So I had all these friends growing up, and I was always friends. I guess it would have been classified in the nerd category, but I'd always known her. So I finally applied to Toronto, and really what got me to push the application for policing was the fact that I got rejected. All right, that's really what did it for me. It was when I really look back and I'm objective about it, the fact that somebody said no to me and I felt like I was qualified to do it, it put the fire under me to be like, I'm not gonna stop until I get it. I just wanted to prove a point, which is absolutely unhealthy, but I proved the point, right? And here I am 14 years later. So I go out to I apply to Toronto Police, and I come in for an interview. And here's the thing, when you apply to police, you have to put down every job you've ever worked, every place you've ever lived. all the people you've ever lived with. I'm drawing a blank. There's a whole bunch of stuff, right? You have to include into that package. Yeah, and at that time, again, I was 23 when I had applied to Toronto Police Service. I had 35 different jobs and about 12 different addresses, right? So you got to go back through it. And when they find out where you live and all that good stuff, they have to do more background checks if you've lived in different cities. So by the time I got up there, and I'd been rejected 5 times, 3 I got rejected in the middle of the process, and then 2 they rejected me on the way home. So I literally come in, put my application on the way home. I got a phone call saying, no thanks, don't even try. Right? I go, okay, cool. So I get to this interview with Toronto, I got this massive package, but you got to put a cover letter. And in my cover letter, I put down all the times I got rejected. And I put down, this is why I think I got rejected, and these are all the things I had done to prove I'm not who I look like on paper. So I'd done a whole bunch of stuff, right? And I always maintained it, always done volunteer work and all of the garbage. And I was surprised, Toronto Police actually gave me a call back. And when they called me, I remember my recruiter called me up and he's like, hey, you ready for your interview? I'm like, did you read my cover letter? Because I was so used to rejection. And he's like, yeah. He's like, listen, we can work with you. So I came in for my interview, and as soon as I sat down with him, he looks at my resume, and he sees the high school I went to, and he goes, oh, do you know my niece? I go, well, who's your niece? So I'm like, oh, I've known her since kindergarten. And as I'm sitting there with him, he calls her on speakerphone. And she had been bullied her whole life, all right? Like all of high school, she'd been bullied. But he and I were always cool with each other. So when he calls her on speakerphone, he says to me, hey, I've got Ron here. How was he to you in high school? Thank God, right? Thank God that her and I were good. And I'd always partner with her on like those one-off projects in science and chemistry where nobody really wanted to partner with her, but I've known her since kindergarten. I never looked at her like that. So she gave me a raving review over the speakerphone, and from that moment, that recruiter I had did everything in his power to get me hired, which ultimately he did. All right, now when I look at the motivation to want to go and do things, I think a common struggle, and I don't know, like, I got cousins your age. Like, how old is everybody here? 20 to 23? Is that a safe category, right? Some guys are lying about their age. Yeah, I got it. No big deal. But regardless, 20 to 23, regardless of that age category, I think the commonality I find in the younger generation, you guys being in particular, like when I grew up, I had 5 career options, all right? And these were given to me by my parents. Right? These are your career options, all right? Lawyer, engineer, police officer, doctor, or failure, okay? These are your 5 options in life, kid. And I didn't know any better, right? So I'm like, okay, these are my options. So I went to kinesiology thinking I'd be a doctor, couldn't hack it, didn't want to do it, no interest in it. So I was ultimately falling in the failure category, and policing for me at the time was like, okay, I can actually do this. So when I got in, I was great. I think what happens now with you guys and girls is that there is so much opportunity that the obstacles you might face in the where do I go going forward is not so much what am I here for, but which part am I going to pick? Does that make any sense? Is you have so many options about all the different things you can do, you're just not sure which one is for me, and that's the difficult part. So what I will tell you about policing is a different animal for anybody else who wants to get in there. I'll tell you, and my partners too, by all means, if you guys want to pipe up, I will tell you what it's actually like and what you don't see on TV, all right, and what you don't actually get it. So when you first start, and I'll kind of go through my career a little bit, and any questions you guys have along the way, by all means ask it, all right? This is the square of trust. Anything you ask here, we'll keep here. I won't judge you too much to your face. I'll judge you outside when I'm out of here, so ask any question. But I'll tell you, when I first started policing, I started in the west end of the city at 23 Division, which is right in Rexdale. All right, and I asked for that spot because even though I grew up in Brampton, I'd always come to Rexdale as a kid. I'd always had friends in Rexdale, so we just bump over, play basketball in Rexdale, come back and forth, do whatever. And so I had a tie in there, right? I was like, look, I kind of know the area, right? I kind of hung out here quite a bit, so if I can come anywhere, I asked for Rexdale. And back then, they kind of asked you where you wanted to go. I don't know if you guys got asked, but I got asked, yeah. So I got asked, and I said, look, these are the places I want to go. 23 Division, which is Rexdale, 31 Division, which is Jane and Finch. And I said, listen, out of those 2, those are like my top 2. I want to go to the west end of the city. So I got 23 Division. You get there, and when you first get hired, what I've talked to a lot of people is they say, look, I want to be a homicide detective. I want to be I want to work in guns and gangs or drugs and all that good stuff. It doesn't work that way. It's a good end goal, but I have to start in regardless of you could have 10 PhDs. It does not matter. They do not care what you have. And when I mean they, I mean everybody else does not care what you have. You can come in with a doctorate, you can come in serving 10 tours overseas. That stuff does not matter, because when you're a cop, you're a cop. So you come in, and as soon as you start, you're on a platoon. A platoon is just your shift, or the number of people you work with, and sometimes it could be anywhere from 10 to 20 people. And what happens is you start, and there's 4 or 5 platoons per division, and you work rotating shifts, all right? And it sucks. It absolutely sucks for you. It's really fun, but it sucks. And when you start these rotating shifts, you come in and you have a really good time. And you go to this, before I get to me getting out there, this is kind of what happens. So you apply to policing, all right? You apply, you put your application in, it's super in-depth. Everything is done online now with the Toronto Police Service. You apply there, you got to get your certificates, whatever it is now, the OACP certificate. And then you go through this interview process, all right? And they ask you everything. And my number one advice to everybody is you got to be honest and upfront. Like, you have to be honest and upfront. Anything you screwed up on before, not everything, but some things, it's totally cool. You just got to be able to explain what you did after the fact. All right, you got to be able to explain your mistakes and say, look, like I haven't made this mistake in 5 years or 4 years or whatever. This is what I've done to correct it. Not a big deal. You got to get through there. Once you get through the interview and the background process, then what they do is they make you do the psychological test, which is it's question and answer. And some questions seem really obvious, some don't seem obvious, but you got to fill that out. And then that gets sent to a psychologist. Then you have to go see a psychologist. They compare your results versus an interview with you. I was 99% sure I failed my interview, my psych interview. I'd call my recruiter and I said, look, man, I think I failed. And he goes, look, man, as long as you don't come back like schizophrenic, we're good. We can make it work for you. So I think I just beat that. And then officially you get the phone call, all right? You get a phone call and you get a job offer. And when you get the phone call is to say, look, congratulations, we want to hire you. You need to show up at headquarters on this day. And you show up at headquarters, and at the time, my class of people that I graduated with was 160 people. So you're there with everybody, you sign your letter of employment, and then that's the beginning of your training, all right? And the training is hilarious. I think it's hilarious now, but at the time, oh my God, it sucked. They treated you like garbage, and it's changed, right? They changed. But when I started, and I was doing this 15 years ago, the way it worked, and before me it was even crazier, right? So it's gotten a lot easier now. But when I started, they bring you in, and you spend 2 weeks with the Toronto Police Service. We have our own police college now. It's nice. It's not too far from here. But at the time, this was at a place called CO Bic at Finch and Brimley, in the east end of the city. And it's this old school that's been converted into a police college, quote unquote. Right? It was like super ghetto. And when you come in, they treat you like garbage, all right? And they do that on purpose. So you come in, nobody cares about you, nobody cares about your background, nobody cares who you're connected to. That doesn't mean anything. They totally break you down, all right? And they do it on purpose. They do it to get that clean slate. You can't come into there. I'm not saying you can't. You can do whatever you want, but you won't be successful long term if you're too committed to an existing idea. All right? You got to be real agile. You got to be real fluid. So they break you down and they make you feel stupid. I'll give you a great story, actually, story I'll remember the rest of my life. And this guy quit the job. He's now in Florida or something like that. This guy, his name was, all right? And he was a great guy. And this is what I mean by like they're on you. So you got to be, if you're a gentleman, you got to be clean shaven, right? Like all the time. Like you got to look proper. You can't show up without ironing your clothes. Like you got to look clean shaven every day. So one day we're in a class and we have a staff sergeant there who runs the class. And we're all sitting there, and if you come in late, you're gonna get it. Like you're gonna get it in front of everybody. They make it a point to make an example out of people. So we're in this class of like 30 people, and in walks in, and the staff sergeant, look, this guy's already late, so you're gonna get all the attention on you. So the staff sergeant comes right to his face, and he looks at him, he's like looking at him, and he says, look, he goes, you didn't shave today. And he goes, sir, I have really sensitive skin. All right, it did not fly. So the staff sergeant yells at him in front of everybody, right? Like, you got to shave or else you're going to be fired today. We're going to send you home right now. You better go shave. Panicky, all right? This is his dream job. He'd worked so hard to get it. The whole process could take anywhere from it could take anywhere from like 6 weeks to a year. So this guy hustled for this job. He finally got his dream job, but now it's in jeopardy because he didn't shave and he walked in a little late. So in this panic. And he's a panic in the room and he's going around to everybody. He's like, does anybody have a razor? Does anybody have a razor? And my other buddy, says, yeah, actually, I got one. So he pulls out this razor, he gives it takes off, right? And the staff sergeant is now yelling at all of us because that's the way it works. If one of you screw up, everybody is getting it. So you start to self-correct really quick, right? You start to stay on top of each other. You start to say, look, man, you can't do that. Like, I don't want to get yelled at again. So 10 minutes pass, the lecture goes on, and in walks All right, and I swear to God, it looked like a murder scene, man. This guy had just toilet paper all over his face, like blood everywhere. Legitimately, he had super sensitive skin. So when he walks in, the whole room fucking dies, right? And you can see the staff sergeant feels terrible. And the best part about the whole thing is, he walks back covered in blood and toilet paper, and he walks right to my buddy. He's like, "Hey man, thanks for the razor." All right, so they break you down quite a bit. So you spend 2 weeks of that, and what they do in the 2 weeks is they go over as quick as they can basic laws, basic stuff like how to shoot a gun, what a gun is, what is the anatomy of the gun, what is a uniform, what is your expectation prior to going to the Ontario Police College. So you make it through those 2 weeks, and it's just a boot camp week. They break you down, they set the clear expectations and the standards of behavior, and they want you to understand, look, you're not in charge here at all. All right, we're in charge because policing is a paramilitary organization. Unless it has to do with like some serious stuff in terms of like I will legitimately die with this, you can't say no. All right, and I don't mean like if there's a guy shooting over there, I can't say, whoa, wait a minute, I can't do anything, but I might die. No, you have to go. What I'm talking about is if there's a house on fire and it's engulfed and they say you got to go inside, you can say no to that because it's obvious you're going to die. But if there's somebody shooting somebody or stabbing somebody or beating somebody up, you cannot say, whoa, I can't do that. That's too dangerous for me. That's actually against a statute called the Police Services Act, right, which means that what you actually get charged with is called cowardice. You can't do that. So you have to go and do it. So they break you down to make you understand as quick as possible, look, you're not in control here. Okay, you have to follow the line. So you go to the Ontario Police College, and now things kind of ease up a little bit. You're there for 3 months. And there at the Ontario Police College, you have police officers that are newly hired from every police service in Ontario. Or you have all of them there, York Region, Peel Region, OPP, Durham, Halton, Peel, wherever else they're all there, and then you get split up. And you mix and match, and you made some really good friends. I still keep in touch with people I graduated Ontario Police College with. And what they do in the 3 months is they give you this super crash course on all the laws that you need to know. All right, which are the ones you enforce the most, being Criminal Code of Canada, Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, Highway Traffic Act, Liquor License Act, Trespass to Property Act. All right, they get you hammered down on all these ones. And then they give you exams, and then you go through these exams. The 3 months is broken down to 2 semesters. So you break it off, you do your thing, you graduate, you can have a lot of fun up there. There's all these sports clubs, there's a whole bunch of other things that you do. I had a really fun time there. I had a really good time. And then you come back to Toronto, all right? And they treat you a little bit better, but not a lot bit better, all right? And then you spend, 6 weeks? Yeah. 6 weeks back in Toronto. And what Toronto tells you when you come back, Toronto says, hey, everything you just learned, forget it.
It's up to 10 now.
Is it up to 10 now? Wow. So Toronto Police College, you bring you back for 10 weeks. And they say, look, we're going to reteach you everything you just learned because Toronto's very different. And what makes Toronto so different is, look, we are the largest city in Canada. We are the 4th largest city in North America. So our dynamics of things are very different. In the police college, they teach you things that give you the luxury of time and distance, which means that you can slow things down if you're in like some country, some country area in Toronto or in Ontario. You have the time to say, look, okay, it's just me and this person, and I got wide open space, so I can be real safe in how I do things. Toronto, you don't. You got narrow hallways, you got small steps, you got busy streets. So Toronto brings you back and they go, look, that stuff is great, you know it, but this is how you actually do it here. And when you do it here, it's super intense, those 10 weeks that they bring you back. It's very intense. It's a lot of shooting. It's a lot of dynamic exercises. It's a lot of fighting. It's a lot of other stuff like that. And then all of a sudden you finish all that stuff, so you're spending about 6 months just relearning everything again. And then you get deployed out. And what I mean by that is you get pumped out to your actual shift, and this is like your first day as a cop. And the way it works is you get a coach officer. So it's somebody assigned to you that's been on the job. It could be anywhere from, 3 years plus. They're having actually very junior officers teach other junior officers, which is probably not the best thing to do. But they do it now, and then you're with this partner for 5 weeks, and they run you through the gauntlet. All right, you're going and you're doing everything. And then you partner with somebody else for 5 weeks, and they're doing the same thing with you. So you spend 10 weeks with coach officers, and they're getting you in the mud with everything. They want to get you exposed to driving tickets, drunk drivers, drug investigations, gun investigations, murders. You're getting the gamut of things, just to have a basic understanding of what needs to get done at this level. And then when you do that, you're on your own. You're on your own. Toronto works a little different. The only time you're actually physically on your own is when you're in a police uniform in a police car is during the daytime. And at nighttime, you're always with a partner, unless you're doing one-off special things. So you're with your partners and you go out. And Toronto is a crazy city. Right? It is a crazy city. I mean, what are you seeing in the news every day right now? Shootings, murders, gangs, guns, drugs. That's Toronto. I think people forget how big the city actually is. We just look at Canada and we say, oh, it's Canada. No, it's a big city. Again, 4th largest in North America. It goes New Mexico, Los Angeles, New York, Toronto. That's where we sit in the pocket. And with that, we have a ton of stuff. I mean, look at all the things that have been happening in the last 3 or 4 years. We've had 2 mass murders. Right? We had the Yonge and Eglinton and the Danforth. We had multiple shootings every day now. We have a homicide rate that's growing larger and larger. We have a gang problem that's growing bigger and bigger. We have problems with violent extremism now. There was the murder just last week where, from what we know right now, from what's in the paper, it's publicly available, we have a guy who's become radicalized and went out and he killed somebody with a hammer and then turned himself into police shortly after, claiming to be an extremist at this point here. It's all here with you. So you're thrown to these lines then when you're on the front line, and that's the stuff people really don't tell you about. Right? What most people think of when they think of policing is they just think of getting pulled over by a cop. That's what they think it is, right? And then people say, oh man, I know what that feels like, because most people have had that interaction at some point. But what you don't realize is the whole other half. And the whole other half is the half that sucks if you don't know how to manage it. And how to manage it, I don't know. I don't know myself. I'm still figuring that out. But the part that sucks is when you have to be there. First time you see a dead body, first time you do CPR on somebody and they don't live. First time you find a dead kid or you're involved in a dead child investigation. First time you deal with a rape victim. First time you arrest a rapist. First time you arrest somebody for murder. First time you find a gun on somebody. First time somebody lies to you. Those are all impactful moments, and they're one of hundreds that you're going to have. And that's the stuff nobody prepares you. And then on top of all of it, you're reading stuff in the newspaper that's not true about you and about what you do. And you're dealing with the garbage of overgeneralization. And the overgeneralization happens when you have a police officer that does something not properly, whether it's criminal or they do something really stupid. They get lambasted in the media and everybody gets painted with that brush. And it's terrible. It sucks. I'll tell you, it sucks, especially when you're there with the intent of just helping people. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to. When I asked you guys at the beginning, I said, what do you want to do? You all said the same thing, right? Ultimately, impact and help people. Impact and help people. And when you're in the space of doing that and you're dealing with people, it's very difficult to do. So for me, I did that for 2 years in the west end of the city. I worked on the road as a primary response officer, and I'd done all the things I told you about. I'd found the dead bodies. I arrested somebody for rape. I saw a kid, an infant who was a victim of sexual assault. You see all these different things. And at the time, it's not like it impacts you right then and there. Right? It doesn't. It happens and you're like, this is crazy. Like, I don't know about you guys, but for me, when it happens, you're like, this is crazy. I can't believe it. It's exciting. It's fun. You really get motivated. You want to catch the bad guys and girls. It's great. And it was a wild, wild west back then. And then after 2 years of doing that on the road, there was a new position we had in Toronto, which no longer exists, called the school resource officer. So I don't know if you guys had school resource officers in your schools, but at the time I was one of the first of 28 police officers in 2008, 2010 that went into schools, and I asked for one of the most violent schools at the time, which, anybody from the west end of the city? What high school did you go to? Oh, MPJ, that's where you're from. Sorry, Don Bosco? No longer Don Bosco's gone. Yes, sir. Scarlet Heights. You're all South Etobicoke people. So I was in NACI, and I asked for NACI, and I asked for that school on purpose because the year I went in September, August, they had 17 drive-by shootings across the street. So heavily gang impacted school. And I said, look, man, if I'm going to do this, I want to do this. So I got into there. So I'd spent 2 years on the road doing some really fun stuff, exciting stuff, but I didn't realize the impact of what that was going to have on me until way later in my career. And then I jumped into the schools, and I did that for 2 years, and it was one of the best experiences I ever had. All right, initially when I went into there, for me, and this is something I'll pass off to you, it's like you don't have to, but I really followed what my gut said. And when I said I want to be a school officer, police officers are not super open-minded sometimes, right? Because we're always caught up in the garbage. So when you hear of new positions like this at that time, some people have told me it was career suicide. They said, don't do that, man. You're going to be stuck doing that kind of stuff for the rest of your career. I did it as an opportunity. I said, look, man, I'm never going to say no to anything. This popped up. I said, I'll definitely do it and see what happens. And I highly recommend that to everybody. In your first 10 years, if you get hired, say yes to everything. And then as you go on, you can pick and choose what you want to do after that. So I said yes to everything my first 10 years. So I got into the schools, and I started a football program. I coached over 80 kids over 2 years. Some of those kids I had to arrest later on. Some of those kids I still talk to today. We have a very good relationship. But I'd done that for 2 years, and I said, look, my time is up. I need to redevelop myself. I got back out. I went into what's called a criminal investigative bureau, which is the detective stuff. So it's when you see the guys and girls that show up in a suit and a tie to these crime scenes. I did that for 6 months, and we all have to do it. It's called CIB, Criminal Investigative Bureau, and you do this training position there. All right, so 2 years on the road, 2 years in the schools, then I did 6 months as an investigator. And that was all right. It was pretty cool. But you're dealing with things like domestic violence. You're dealing with mischief, some minor crimes. Yeah, you're dealing with all this other garbage. You learn how to do an investigation. And you'd think that being a police officer on the street, you understand a full investigation. You do, but you really don't until you become an actual investigator. Now, this is the criminal investigative side. So now I'm the detective back at the station, and these two come in. Now I have to process the case. I have to process the victim statement, and then I have to be the one that goes to court and manages this case. It's called an OIC, officer in charge. So you're just managing these individual cases. That's what detectives do. So you manage that case. I did that for 6 months. I left, went back to the street for a couple weeks, and then I went down to headquarters to our community mobilization unit, which doesn't exist anymore. And what I ended up doing there was I had done a good enough job as a school officer that they asked me to come to headquarters to help head it up for the entire city. So I did that for a year and a half, and then I said, you know what, I want to get back to the streets. And instead of going back to Rexdale, I went to downtown. I went to 14th Division, which is the area that covers Parkdale. All right, so I covered there, and I said, man, this is going to be cool. Now, the west end of the city versus downtown is very different. The west end is guns and gangs. All right, there's drugs here, but it's not as obvious. The west end is guns and gangs. And a couple of the big differences I had is, and you'll experience this if you get into policing, is, and I'll ask you guys, man, do you remember the first time somebody lied to you? Day one. Listen, that's heartbreaking, man. When you are a brand new cop, you're a rookie, and you have this idea that everybody is inherently good, which we are. But you got to keep in mind the clientele we're dealing with. Does anybody call police because they have extra pizza at home? You have to find the things that don't make sense and then ask questions. Like we used to, I used to crack this joke with my partners when we were in the car, and it was just a joke. We'd be in a uniform, in a police uniform, in a police car, and we'd be driving by, and the joke used to be, I'd be like, man, that looks suspicious. Somebody should do something about that. And we would just drive away, right? It was just a joke. The joke is that's what we do. That's your job. So you get told by your senior officer, your coach officer, look, I want you to go on those 5 people who don't like you for no reason, or for a reason, experience that they've had in the past. They've been arrested. They don't have a good relationship with you. You need to go and find out all their names, and they'll come back here until you do. All right, so how many of you right now would feel comfortable doing that? Boom, ready to roll, right? And that's a great mentality to have. And for those of you who aren't comfortable, it's cool. You'll learn that. That's kind of why they go to college, right? To break you down and to rebuild you up as a bit of a different mindset. So I go to these guys and I do exactly what they teach us in the police college. From the police college, they tell you you have to wear your hat on your head, and you got to walk over and you have to say, good night, sir, how are you? My name is Police Constable Ron Chhinzer. I'm with the Toronto Police Service. I work at a 23 Division. The reason I'm speaking to you today is, and then you got to give them the whole spiel. So I do that, and right away, I still remember the 5 guys. One guy turns his back to me, and he goes, rookie. I was like, oh, yeah, damn, he knows, right? This is my first encounter. So now I flip back, right? And I flip back, and the benefit is, and this is where I'm like, really embrace like your childhood. Like really embrace it. And for me, I went back to like my childhood, right? Like my teenage years. And I was like, who are you talking to, man? I forgot I was a cop for a second, right? And I was like, who are you talking to? And things changed. So I didn't know any better. And my coach officer set me up, right? They set me up. Yeah, he set me up. So eventually 4 guys gave me their ID. I managed to talk to them on a level that I'm comfortable talking to them at. And then they knew, okay, I'm not going to screw around here. But one guy, he didn't have any ID. He told me his name. And I come back and I run all the guys in our systems. And 4 guys, they came back with small stuff, but nothing crazy. They were all okay. And then the other guy came back with nothing. And I go, whoa, man, this guy must have never been stopped by police before. And my coach goes, are you sure about that? And I'm like, yeah, he told me his name. And he's like, he didn't tell you his real name. And I was like, what? No, man, we're good. Like I talked to him. He's like, he didn't lie. He lied to you. So I had to go back and I just called him. I go, man, you lied to me. And I was like legitimately upset about it. All right. I was like heartbroken that this guy lied to my face. I'm a police officer in a police uniform. I'm just here to help. That's my mentality going in. And this guy lied to me. You know, you got guts on you, man. So then now I'm pissed, right? And I'm like, look, you lied to me. I'm like, you're going to tell me your real name. And we ended up going back and forth. Eventually he gave it to me. He's wanted on a warrant. So great. But I remember I could not shake that. I didn't trust anybody for like a year. which takes you down this rabbit hole of distrust. All right, and sometimes it takes a long time to find the trust back in people. So you're going through these emotions, right? Of I don't trust anybody unless somebody has a passport, a fingerprint, and a driver's license. I don't believe you are who you say you are. So then I go downtown, that's the west end of the city. I go downtown, and it's the complete opposite. Drug addicts aren't necessarily bad people. They're drug addicts. For those of you here, and you don't have to put your hand up, but if you have a family member that's an addict to anything, whether it be alcohol or drugs, prescription medication, anything, they're not terrible people. They just have a sickness. So even though I worked in the city of Toronto, I'd worked in 2 different divisions at the time that were 2 completely different worlds. And I was like, man, this is crazy. So I worked downtown for a little bit. I worked on the road, and then I went to what we call a major crime unit, which is on the side that I worked on was called Vice, which was you work kind of like this, and all we focused on was drug investigations, break and enters, robberies, and liquor. Liquor being all the nightclubs downtown. And to go check on all the clubs to make sure that nobody's being overserved, to do liquor license checks. So I got to know everybody in the entertainment district. And I'd worked in the entertainment district before, but like 10 years earlier. So I did that for a couple of years, and there you start to see a different side of things. And now I'm starting to understand, there's some bigger stuff happening in the back end, and we got involved in all these cool investigations. And after a year and a half of that, I got asked to come up to the Gun and Gang Task Force. And then over the course of your career, you develop this tool chest that you're like, I got tips and tricks that I'm going to take from everybody. And you just take it and you end up developing your own. So I worked in Guns and Gangs for a couple of years, and I got burnt out. And that's the part that they don't tell you. All right, you're working 24/7, and if you have a family, I mean, just by a raise of hands here, who in their ideal future has a spouse and kids? And out of you guys and girls who put it up, who wants to stay with their spouse and kids? And herein lies the problem with policing, all right? And this becomes the balancing act. All of the really fun things in policing that can totally consume you, absolutely consume you, right? Because it's so fun. You're legitimately, when you're working there, when I worked in Guns and Gangs, I felt like I was in a movie. Because that's what you're doing. You're doing the stuff you see on DEA, on the TV shows, you're doing that stuff you see in Bad Boys and all these movies that I watched growing up. You're actually doing it. You're not dealing with small-time people. You're dealing with murderers. You're dealing with gunmen. You're dealing with heavy, legitimate gang members. That's all you focus on is just guns and gangs. If there's a gun in a gang member's hand, that's it. That's all we focus on. But that stuff catches up to you. So it caught up to me, and I said, no more. So I left after a couple of years, and I went back to the road. Except when I went back to the road, I went back to the west end of the city. And I reconnected, and I really loved, and I really valued being a frontline uniformed police officer. All the cool stuff that I did, that stuff is cool, but nothing is more impactful, and nothing is more risky and more dangerous and more important and also more fun than being a frontline police officer. Like, that's my thoughts on it. And I think it's so fun. The issues a lot of people have with it is they don't realize how fun and how important it is to be a frontline uniform officer, pulling people over and responding to all the 911 calls right away. You're the first person there on some of the most exciting and some of the most craziest things. They get devalued because there's a heavy burnout attached to it. You can't, for me, I could not do that forever. I didn't know how to manage it. Now I have a different perspective onto it, but it took me almost 14 years to understand what that perspective looks like. So I go through all that stuff, and then I leave Guns and Gangs. I come back to the road for 6 months, and then what I do now popped up. And for me growing up, again, when I said I didn't have an ideal group of friends growing up, and I made really poor decisions, it actually came to work for me a little bit different. Once I had established myself in policing, I started being a little bit more open about my upbringing with certain people that I trusted. Because there's this idea, and policing's changed so much. It's gotten so much better in terms of the perspective into things, right? There's true value to having your own experiences, and it's drawing on your own experiences. Policing, you have to learn a lot. You're never going to know everything. So every day you're learning something, and you become really comfortable not knowing, all right? And the benefit of it is you have partners and a network of 5,000 people you can call at any time and say, look, what do I do here? Like, I don't know what to do. And there's always somebody to help you. And it's never looked down upon to call up and say, I don't know what to do. It's actually looked very highly upon because you don't want to screw anything up. So it's very open for those type of questions. But what they don't really prep you for is again the burnout and the lack of managing yourself out there, right? And connecting your personal experiences with your professional. Your professional experiences will get you really far, but if you really want to separate, you got to start being real insightful about your personal experiences. So for me, once I really started to attach to my personal experiences in different lenses, everything happened kind of by chance, but I got asked to come back to Guns and Gangs. But this time when I got asked to come back, I got asked to come back to solve a question or to come up with an answer to a question. The question was, how do we get a gang member out of a gang? And for the first time in my career, which you'll understand it, it's not going to have any value to you now. But for those of you who get into policing, you're going to remember this. I hope you remember this 10 years from now when you get hired, that for the first time, I actually started to choose what I wanted to do. All right, and this comes down to what do you define as success? So there was a guy I worked for who I really respected. He retired, but I still talk to him to this day. And I had an opportunity pop up, and it was to go to our headquarters. Now here's the thing: when I talked about going to headquarters to run the community mobilization program, and my one boss at the time said, "Look, man," when I picked his brain and I really respected him, I said, "What do you think?" And he goes, "Well, you need to define what success is for you." So I thought about it with him, and here's what I noticed from that conversation. When you become a police officer, all right, legitimately my first couple years, I never looked at my pay stub. I don't know about you guys. I was so happy and so excited that I finally became a cop that it became a different ballgame for me. I legitimately was not doing it for the money. I knew I was getting paid, right? And I was getting paid okay, but I was so focused on like having fun. I could not believe I got my dream, right? Especially after being rejected so many times. So I was so caught up in that actual moment of being a cop that as time goes on, you start to realize that, look, in policing, what really defines success is not so much for the majority of the population how much money you made, it's what title you have and where you've worked. So we're title-driven people. Right, so people want to say, well, I worked on the road. Like I bounced around a lot in my first 10 years only because when I look back at it, to be objective and to be fair, I was looking for the title clout. I wanted to say I worked here and I did this and I did that because it does buy you internal credibility. Say I've done this, I've done that, I've worked at all these different places and you make friends. But at some point, you have to redefine what that actually means for you. Because if you're constantly chasing titles, you're never going to be content. So for me, after 10 years of chasing titles, I chose to step back, and when this popped up, I had full control to say, okay, this is something I wanted to do. So I decided, yeah, I'm going to do this. The last 3.5 years, we've been in the space of trying to figure out how to get a gang member out of gang, and I've a lot of personal drive and motivation to want to find that out because I grew up with, unfortunately, and I'm growing a little detached to the word gang, because when you actually look at what happens for somebody from the age of 0 to 18 to become a gang member, it's terrible. Right? It's like the most broken in first world countries become gang members, which is crazy to think of, right? And gangs exist in other areas, they're just called different things. But in Toronto, it's a different ballgame, man. In Canada, it's a different ballgame. There is no reason for gangs to exist, yet they exist. And when you look at them from psychosocial perspectives and all these different things, it's a real weird position to be in, because you have some of the violent people now stemming down to the age of 12, 13, 14 that are having guns and pulling triggers, and you feel really bad for them. But then on the other end, you see what they do to people, right? And they do a lot of bad things to a lot of innocent people. Right? Again, they sex traffic people, they deal drugs. If you have family members that are addicted to drugs, what about them? What about their families? For those of you who have drug addicts in your family, what's the impact for you? Right? If you look at murders, that's forever, that's life-changing. And we're so invested into communities and with actual gang members and their families, we kind of scaled back on that it's been a real eye-opening experience to say, what is actually going on here? And when you actually look at how deep the problem goes with gang members in particular, and what happens after the war, it's just a game of losers. And that's pretty much summarizes policing. This is a game of losers. You're not going to win. So the perspective I have going into things is I don't look to do anything to win. I just doing it to do my job and do my job well. Because think about it, by the time police get involved in anything, there's already a loser. By the time we arrest the guy, you don't really, at the beginning you're super happy, but at some stage, I can only speak for myself, at some stage I was like, how much more are we gonna do this for? Like how many times do I have to arrest the same person, or how many times am I gonna come across the same type of investigation or same type of crime and see the same things from both the person who did the crime and the victims of the crime? And it starts to become really defeating at some point. So it's about finding okay, where's your anchor point? And how do you stick to it, and how do you stay motivated? And I don't have an answer for you for that. I don't know exactly what mine is, but I know it's I'm really motivated by certain things, and they all have to do with personal, nothing to do with professional. Look, the reason I never got hired was, sorry Peter, how are we for time, by the way?
Up until 10.
So what time is it now? 10:20? Oh, 20 minutes? Perfect. So I'll give you an example, all right? And this is what I want you to really think about, because like you got to be real with yourself, and like 100%, you can't this. If you are a artist, you will not last long in policing. 100%. You're gonna be caught within 3 days. And what I mean by caught is people are gonna know who you are. You know, I've worked with guys and girls that have both been like, oh, you know, small dumb things, the most obvious things, like, oh, I'm so tough, I can do this and that. Listen, you're gonna be tested on it really quick. It's not a place you can fake that for a long time, right? It doesn't exist. So when I say you gotta be real with yourself, I don't mean you gotta be, you know, not secure with yourself or not confident. What I'm saying is you gotta be confident in you know, who exactly you are and what you're doing this for. And it's the what, it's not the why. I hear people all the time, they say, well, what's your why? That's a nonsensical question to me. To me, right now in this stage of life, and I might change my mind next week, I'm leaving that open to change, right? I'm not locking myself up, but right now I think why is a stupid question to ask. I think it's a dumb question to ask. I'll tell you why it's a dumb question to ask is, if I were to ask you here, why do you want to be a police officer? So the police officers in the room, why do you want to be a police officer? Well, and what else? Give me some other whys why you want to be a police officer, or why do you want to do what you want to do? Right? It's kind of a weird question because you're 100% true. I believe you guys 100%. All right, but a better question to ask is, what happened for you to want to become a police officer? You're 4 years old, and if you don't mind me asking, because I kind of have a feeling I know where this is going, what happened at 4 for you to meet a police officer? Yeah. Now you see the difference in the whys and the what? The what's an anchor point. Okay, the what is what you hold on to. For me. So I always look back, okay, what happened for me to want to do this? Because you're going to get defeated all the time, right? You're going to lose. It's a game of losers. And the whys are important to remind yourself why you're doing what you're doing, but the whats are the most important to remind yourself why you're showing up. And it's the whats because it's the what that you can tie into to say, okay, can I be that for somebody else? Or look at that, 4 years old, you had such an impactful moment, and all it took was a police officer to pick you up and put you on a horse, and that changed the trajectory of your life. Safe to say? That's pretty cool. Imagine that never happened. You can't even imagine because it's a whole different reality, but to look at the what happened is the most important part for you. And, you know, for me, I have multiple whats that happened that were never good, right? They were not good with the exception of few interactions I had with police officers that they were my coaches in sports. And when I had them as coaches, I really looked up to them. I really liked the way they carried themselves. I really liked how professional they were, how intense they were. Like I dove into that and I said, yeah, man, I really like this. Like these are my type of people. And I really attached to that, but that's not just the only one. I had terrible experiences as well growing up. And for me, and in particular what I do now, what my biggest motivator is I grew up with my best friend. He was my best friend from grade 6 on. And growing up from grade 6 on, remember I told you when I applied to policing, I had 35 jobs on my resume. All 35 jobs were done with this guy. Okay, we were hand to hand. We were like attached at the hip. And as we got older, we both had stuff happen to us. His stuff was obviously worse than mine. And really his dream, his actual dream. So my dream was never to be a cop. That was not part of my future in my head when I was a kid. All right, I was like, oh man, I had no idea what, but it was not a cop. But this guy, his dream was to be a cop. Like 100% from when we were grade 6, grade 7. He wanted to be a cop, and best friends all the way up and all the way up through school. But at 18, he got charged criminally because his younger brother had come home, and his younger brother, some other guys in the neighborhood, called him a racist term, beat him up at the park. His younger brother came home, told us. We went back to the park. My buddy, his name is, went there and threatened these guys and said, "If you ever touch my brother again, I'll kill you." And Vic was like 6'3", 280 pounds when we were 18. He was a big dude. And the kids ran home, told their parents. Parents called the police, got charged. And when we kept applying to policing, he was rejected quicker than I was because he had that criminal conviction on his record. So when we applied at 19, 20, 21, 22, and at the time, Vic and I had worked in the entertainment district downtown. We've always worked together. And we were always around mafia and mob and organized crime. and we chose different paths. So I had a few serious things happening downtown, and I'm like, listen, I'm out of here. I left, he stayed, and he went down a different path. And in February, kid got caught discarding a dismembered body in another part of Ontario, and then he committed suicide in jail. And when I went to his funeral, I was heavily advised not to go because of the amount of people that were going to be there. I did not care. I didn't go for who he became. I went for who he was. And when I went back to his house, and we had a falling out about 10 years ago, so we've talked in between them, but nothing tight. I didn't know how high up he was and what he was doing. But when I got back to his funeral, he left behind 2 kids, a wife, obviously his mom, and there was about 500 people at his funeral, which blew my mind. Or like I did, you don't expect it, right? Where I've had family members die, and there's like 50 people, 100 people. This guy was so well connected. There was about 400 or 500 people there. And when I went out there, and I asked everybody what happened, because I was pissed, right? I wanted to know what happened and how this got out of control. What do you think everybody said to me? It's a different ballgame. So when I left, I spoke to his family. I stayed in touch with his younger brother. We still stay in touch. There's a whole bunch of question marks, mysteries. But that for me became the what for me to be like, look, like why do this? Because when I look back at him, and I can look back at all the gang members I deal with, and even myself, I'm seeing him everywhere. Everything that he went through from grade 6 on, I see it everywhere. I can't believe it. To really prevent the loss of life and to maximize people's success, that to me is bigger than a paycheck. It's bigger than the frustrations I go through every week. It's bigger than that. It's like, okay, look, man, there might be something else here. So for me, the reason I share that with you now, it's like I'm comfortable sharing it. I've digested it myself. But I think it's important to recognize really what happened for you, not opposed to why, right? Why is there, but you're going to answer those questions on an interview all the time, right? It's going to say, why are you doing this? Yeah, why are you doing this? You're going to say, well, I want to help people. Great. But a much more impactful answer and a real reason to drive to it is what happened. You know, what happened? Start with that. What happened for me to want to do this job? Because I'll tell you, man, you got to think about the type of person that wants to become a police officer. You're a little messed up to begin with. All right, that's my opinion. When you think about people, and one of the examples they give you in police colleges, they say, look, policing is a different animal because when everybody hears gunshots there, what's the natural response for everybody? If you hear gunshots coming from there, where do you go? You go the opposite way. You know where we go? That way. All right, we go there. We don't even think about it. You're just like, oh man, there's something happening. I got to go over there and check it. It's a real mind shift. You're never having the same day. If you do not like having the same day, if you do not like being attached to a desk, if you like talking to people, this is 100% the job for you. 100% the job for you. The true test is how do you balance it with a normal life, which nobody knows how to do. I don't know many people who are.